forever and ever and ever, and if you've never met Paul Bonnifield, you are in for a treat. He is going to talk about the conflicts and crimes in Routt County. So, Paul Bonnifield.
Thank you much, and before we get started, can everybody hear? Everybody see me and get a good shot to throw something if need be? Say, there's one thing I'm sure of. I don't know how the talk will go, but I know the beer is damn good, so enjoy that. But we're going to do, last time we were here, maybe, I don't know, most of you, or some of you at least, were here last time, and Candace said, so to have sessions where you didn't have those things that appeared in the museums. At least you wouldn't find them on the wall of the museum. And so what we'll do tonight is try to look into the closets of the...
I'll hold the mic up to your mouth.
All right, get this thing right. Do it the way it should be. All right, pay attention. All right, I'll try to... If I don't get it right, just don't throw something, just tell me. But anyhow, what we'll do tonight is we will try to look into the closet of the history of Routt County and see some of those things that you probably won't hear about a great deal. Now I will, and let me caution you, I will be talking about some of the people and telling some of the things about them that are in their closet, but it is not intended to bring out a lot of dirt. Most of these things happened over 100 years ago, and some of the families are still around. So do it with the respect of trying to understand their time, understand their place, understand what was going on, rather than trying to we're going to make some kind of a snide and dirty remark about them. That is not my intention at all. And some of it is, well, when we get into fraud, you're going to find it was so damned widespread that they didn't think anybody was committing fraud. I start with them. By the federal land law for coal, 1873, a person could file on 160 acres of a land and pay $10 an acre for the coal if it was more than 15 miles from an operating railroad. Now, if it was less than 15 miles from an operating railroad, he would have to pay $20 a ton for the coal. An association could have 320 acres of coal. Well, you can't build a railroad or do those things, as they pointed out in 1905, 1910, with just 160 acres of coal. Well, in 1886, anthracite coal was discovered up at Pilot Knob. Now, the Union Pacific Railroad sent a man down and he checked the coal out and did not believe it was very important. But a group of Denver railroad and businessmen, which included Moffett, sent Arthur Lake out about 1890, and he checked it, and then they core drilled it with a diamond drill and decided there was a tremendous amount of anthracite coal there. 1900, the Colorado biannual report on coal said that there was $51 million worth of coal in one single vein there at Pilot Knob. Now, there were 3 different locations of coal that they discovered. All right. In 1906, James Crawford sold to the Yapa Fuel and Iron Company 1,200 acres of anthracite coal. Now, if you're only allowed 160 acres, and you come up with 1,200 acres that you sell for $200,000, then there's probably a problem besides needing to build the rock house that's down here on Harvard Hill. You know, David Morgan Morgan Flats, which is out of Hayden. You know, he also claimed 800 acres that he sold to the Elkhead Anthracite Company for a large sum of money, $80,000. Now, they did not collect all their money on it, and they had to reclaim them back. And Ezekiel Sheldon, he sold 3,000 acres of ground out of Hayden that was anthracite property, believed to be anthracite. Now, at 160 acres apiece, there's one heck of a lot of fraud going on here. Now, what happened, you see, with the Yampa Fuel and Iron, they claimed 75,000 acres of coal and iron land in Colorado and Utah. They were going to make a fuel company that would be competitive with CF&I. What they would do, and what was common throughout the West, was the dummy entry men. They would get somebody. As in a lot of times, they would get somebody. The sheriff in St. Louis would just send his deputies out, and they would gather somebody up and get a signature. He would claim the property. They'd get $100. Some of them would claim the property and actually file on it, you see, and go through the process and get their 100 acres, or get a claim, and then they would get their $100. And it was a fraudulent deal to get the coal land or any of the other. Now, timber. And then we'll come back to coal in a minute. But when they first came in with the railroad, arriving in Yampa in 1908, they had a survey crew in Yampa that was going out and surveying timberland. And then somebody, if you read the paper where they file at, they're filing out of Nebraska and out of Kansas and out of every place else they could get 80 acres of a timber, and they claimed all the country on King Mountain, all the country on Green Ridge. 1915, when the Sarvis Creek Lumber Company was starting to operate, they claimed 4,000 acres. Well, you're only allowed to get 80 acres. They were taking large chunks of ground. The Willems, who was out at Lay, early settlers that were out there, well-known, photographs that were shown in to Chicago during the World Fair there. In 1906, the federal government started reclaiming the fraudulent land within the county, within the northwestern Colorado, not just the county. And the first place they started was at Lay. The Wisconsin Fuel Company had claimed thousands of acres of coal land out at Lay. And they take them to court, and they did have the dummy entries had been taking the land out there. The Carpenter's Ranch down near Dawson's, they claimed 4,000 acres of oil land, including that of Toe Creek, and 10,000 acres of coal land. There was, 4 more. The Toponis Fuel Company that was out in 20 Mile. In fact, 20 Mile Park, you see, 1905, the editor from the Yampa Leader, he traveled across 20 Mile, and he said all that land had been claimed by someone. And there wasn't a single hole anywhere where anybody dug in and actually found land or coal. And the Carrie Ranch, that was the center for their operation. They had all of 20 Mile Park claimed. In fact, after they got through this, there's a whole series. Get into the newspapers, 1906 to 1911, and you will find a whole series, and they're very frank about the cases. You're seeing who's in them and who's there. It's like a who's who in the county. All of the people, you want to know who your friend is? Look him up, he's sitting there going to court with you, because all of them were there. And it's, at all of 20 Mile, they had to resettle it after 1912, because that's finally when they got them all settled. The railroad, you're talking about the railroad coming in, you see, and the importance of it here. But it came to Steamboat and stopped. One of the things that you will not hear too much in any of the reports of why it failed is the fact all that coal land at Mount Harris, or practically all of it except for the Wadge mine that Wadge had, was legitimate back to 1880s, was fraudulent land. The Greeley coal company that was down where Hamilton is at now, it was fraud. The whole country was fraud. Starting in the 1890s, a man by the name of Sam Adams came in here, and if you read, you see about David Moffat and how liberal he was with letting people come in and out, and the frontiersmen. They will always talk about, well, Sam Adams could come into the bank and just talk to him. Hell, Sam Adams is the man that's up here in Routt County that is running the dummy entry business. He and A.A. Johnson. They started in 1900. They organized the Routt County Investment Company. One of the leading men there was Charles Leckenby with the newspaper. They're all there. And it wasn't just, let me catch a little boat here right quick, where I'm at. It wasn't just fraud with coal land. Our banking was another problem. In fact, we've had a little bit of the Ponzi game going on here. Not only here, but across a lot of the places. But 1923 at Maybelle. Now there had been a boom out in that country during World War I. Things were going very well. Well, then the bank goes broke at Maybelle, and the leading people there are got for embezzlement. That's only one. 1924, the bank at Baggs, Wyoming. $105,000 had been embezzled, and it had a racket going. You see, the banker, he would loan the money to a rancher, a developer, somebody there, and then after he went out the door, they split the money, and there was never any payment made. There wasn't any intended in payment. The man would just leave. They'd write it off as a bad debt, and next one down the line, and they kept it up. $105,000 worth out of Baggs, Wyoming. But the one that really is worth, that I like, Allen Cliff. Now, Oak Creek is a place where you can find a land of its own. Now, Oak Creek, you see Allen Cliff. Now, this is a family that was really in with the Ku Klux Klan and going to get rid of all the things that were not, truly American. Well, anyhow, in 1926, Allen Cliff, he left town. He had got into the school account for about $25,000, took his 18-year-old mistress and went to California. Well, after he got out there, and a while afterwards, he wrote a letter to his wife. Now, she really liked getting this kind of letter, I'm sure, saying, if you go into the safety deposit boxes, you will find this certain box, you will find a record of how I took all the money. It's all right there. How long I've been escorting or courting this gal. Everything you need to know. Well, he stayed in California for a while, and then the bank inspector came out from Denver to find out what was going on. Hell, he found there was another $20,000 missing that nobody ever gave account for. So not only had Allen got away with $25,000, probably his wife and his father-in-law got away with another $20,000, and they didn't go to prison. He did. Because after fashion, him and his mistress split up, and he turned himself in and went to prison. One of the sadder cases, 1931, see, the banks were, depression is on. As a cashier at one of the two banks in Craig, when he took over, the bank, the officials there had milked the bank for $162,000. Great reading if you go down and read the newspapers. They were great for telling stories then, but they'd already milked the bank for $162,000. But Jim was a pretty honest fellow, and he was trying to pay it off. But the Depression came, and he had paid it off to a matter of, till he only owed $74,000, which is still a tremendous amount of money. And the bank failed, and he was pretty well broke up out of it, and he goes to prison. But he came back, and he stayed, and his family is still here and leading people up on Elk River. So I'm not, but the newspaper mentions then that what had happened was not only the bank in Craig, you see, it would borrow money from the bank in Hayden, which in turn borrowed money from the banks in Steamboat, which in turn borrowed money from the banks in Oak Creek, from Mr. Allen's hat, and then the banks in Yampa, and then the bank, while it was still operating, at Baggs, and the bank at Idaho Springs. And as long as they could keep the balls in the air, you see, as long as the Ponzi game could go on, they kept it up. And that was, all of them was in on this Ponzi game of borrowing from each other, back and forth and here and there, and who has what, in a sleight of hand game with the money, until the Depression caught up with all of them. And it got all of the banks in Routt County, it got all of the banks in Moffat County. Now, then Oak Creek and Steamboat will come together to form another bank afterwards, because counties needed one. And you have the First National Bank and Steamboat that comes out of it. But the whole business that was going on then was simply one of a Ponzi game between them with the banks. When they talk about, you see, well, the Depression broke us, they don't tell you how damn much money they'd already taken out. You see, because there was quite a little bit of it. And not only, but banker at Yampa, he also went to prison over the deal. So they got to, but of a town now, it really was the one that was worth, has its own story, and they didn't care about it. It was Oak Creek. See, now Oak Creek was a wide open town to start with, and it stayed that way for as long as it could. You know, it was founded with the purpose of being wide open. If you turn off there at the post office, you go up Bell Avenue, see that used to be the town boundary right there. Well, the building right to the north of that, across it, was Reading's. It's a house for the young ladies or prostitution. And it's right across the street, but he's just out of town. So he had one of them. There was gambling. It was wide open with gambling, prostitution, liquor, anything you wanted. It was in Oak Creek. Now, you see, the town government, being what it is, and to keep things together, they didn't want to pay, as did many of the rest of the towns, wanted to have to pay for the marshal, or any of the other business, you see. So they didn't pay the marshal, and the marshal would go to each one of the bars and collect so much money. And the biggest business for the businessmen was to become the mayor and hire the marshal, because you could run the other people out or milk them for whatever you wanted. Now, in McKinley, I can't think of his first name right now. Anyhow, his folks owned the Routt Fuel Company, and then one of those mines that was in question across from it, the Yapa Valley mine, as you go up, became the Pinnacle mine, the Victor mine. Well, in 1911, McKinley was running for office as the mayor to clean up Oak Creek. Now, he's a man that has power, he has position, because he owns the mine, he hires people. You see, he's not the ordinary kind that they have. But he went down in the mine one day to inspect it, and somehow, it was never determined how, some cars got loose behind him, some mine cars, caught him in a narrow part of the mine, and mangled him up pretty bad. They put him on a train and headed for Denver with him, and he died on the way. They managed to go back to their business in Oak Creek without too much interruption.
Wow.
Now, there was, you see, a couple of men, Zavato and Stevens, Santo, excuse me. There had been some kind of trouble. You see, they were workers, and they were down by the railroad, or the depot, and got in a fight, and Stevens beat up Savanto pretty bad. So Savanto goes home. Now, he'd been drinking pretty hard. And he goes home and gets his rifle, and he waits till Stevens comes home. Well, he shoots Savanto twice in the hip. Well, you see, no one really gave a damn. Hell, he just got shot in the ass, nothing bad. And the newspaper said it wasn't too bad injuries anyhow. And it was so much fun shooting that he just stayed in his house and shot at anybody that came by. But as the paper reported, there wasn't too much danger because he couldn't shoot worth a damn. So he, if he couldn't shoot, he didn't worry. Well, Frank Watts, who was one of the big shots in town, and Jim, can't think of his last name. Anyhow, they go up behind and they disarm Savanto and take him to jail, and he very quickly received a backdoor pardon and is out and gone, so it doesn't make any difference. But then you see, shortly after that, Jim, and I should bring my notes out. But anyhow, he was the mayor or the marshal in town, but he also is running the Big Six Saloon. Well, down at Reedy's house of their recruit, there's a gal by the name of Laura Smith, or that's the name she's going by. So he marries her, you see, and they have something going, but anyhow, they have a house living there in town. Well, one day, Laura goes back down to Reed's to dance. Jim is at the Big Six, and he comes out to get his wife and bring her home. Well, they get started for home, and one of the gamblers there in Oak Creek stops him and gets Jim to go back downtown because there's some business to take care of with the marshal. Well, Laura turned around and go back down to Reed's. When he goes down, Jim then goes down and gets his wife and brings her back. Well, they're sitting at the kitchen table. Well, during the earlier that day, Laura had said, if he ever hits me again, I'll kill him. Well, they get to arguing. Jim slaps her, and she kept her word and shot him twice. So now when the trial takes place, you see, they say, well, she was flirting with all of the people and all of the men and so on, so they really sent her to prison. Now, when it comes to Ann Bassett, if you read the articles about her, when she was tried for cattle rustling, they talk about, you see, she's a young woman in her 30s, well-read, well-bred and lovely to look at. And the judge, the jury, and the lawyers couldn't keep their mind on the business at hand. As a result, she got away. So, depends on how the lady acted, I guess. Now, there was other events that within the town of Oak Creek, before we get into some of the more changes, that are attached with the settlement that goes through the time. Now, you have to realize all we talk about, you see in the mystique of homesteading and so on, it really was a pretty hard deal and an extremely difficult strain on a lot of people. There was a young couple, or a family it should be, they lived down in 20 Mile. It's a dry land place, and to make a living, the husband would go into work in the mines, which is very common in the wintertime, and the mother and her daughter and son stayed out at the ranch, the homestead. Well, it's a small place, and it's cold, and it's miserable to be into, and the strain was hell on the mother. Very bad, and she was with the daughter, who's now 14 years old. They wouldn't let her go to school, and nearby was some young boys who were there, and she didn't want them playing with them, you see, and they're from Europe, and they don't speak the language and the culture, and the wind blows and everything else is bad out there. Well, the mother expected the daughter to do most of the work of the place. We don't know exactly what happened. Anyhow, the girl said she went to leave to go check their trap line, and the gun accidentally went off, and the first round hit her mother, and then her mother said, well, go ahead and shoot me because it hurts so much and kill me. So she did, so there's 2 shots in it. And then they didn't know what to do because the other boy is 10 years old, so they buried her in a manure pile, and then they go into Oak Creek and tell their dad, mother's very sick. Well, she came back out and found her dead. And of course it had been a murder. But because the girl is 14, they tried her, you see, as a juvenile, sent her away to a reform school, and she spent her time there. 7 years later, I had read this article about the killing in the paper, and I was talking to an older woman there in Oak Creek, and she just turned pale almost with it. And she told me, don't you ever tell anybody about that. Don't you ever say a word to anyone about it. I didn't know why. And then while we were there, another elderly woman of the same age came in, and the first woman spoke to the other one and used her first name, Anne. Anne was the gal that had shot her mother. What had happened in Oak Creek, this is a bit of the reason I tell that, is I was told not to ever tell anybody about this story. No, there is a reason to it that goes beyond that. You see, once she came back from reform school, the word was she had been away to school, she married, she stayed in Oak Creek all her life, was a highly respected person. Those people who knew the circumstances were willing to forgive and to forget, and they didn't want any big-mouth historian telling the story. And I understand that, because there's something you see about being considerate of somebody else, to being thoughtful of somebody else, and to being of their needs. Now that didn't always happen with them all. There was a case now you see up on the Upper Egeria Creek. And again, because the families are still around, I'll just use the last name of an M and a C. they could go with anybody. But M was a big man, and he beat the hell out of his wife several times. So she finally left and went down to C's home, who's also a married man and has a family. Well, C's wife protects M's wife until she could get out and get a divorce and get away from there. Well, later on, time passes, and M marries another woman and is there, but there have always been hard feelings between them. Any kind of a social gathering within the community of Upper Egeria Creek, there was always tension of because M would want to beat up on C. Well, one winter day, the calves, C's calves, got in on M's property. Well, the boys would go over to get the calf. Well, M sees them, and he starts for the house. And now he's armed. But when he gets out there, he sees C that is checking his trap line. Comes over there for him, words are said, times get tough, and C shot and killed him. There was this tension between them of family issues, C, that goes. Well, now C afterwards moved to to Hayden, and they're still one of the leading families down there. One of the better people. And up in on Egeria Creek, M is still one of those old standardized names that nobody ever says anything about the killing that took place. Now up on the Morrison Creek, Alfred Todd was, they were having a celebration. It's the 4th of July. Everybody at Homesteaders up there, and as Dude said, there was more kids and dogs than there was anything else. They couldn't hardly make a living. But anyhow, Alfred, who is a bachelor, decided instead of going to the picnic, he would go fishing. So he's out on his neighbor's property catching grasshoppers. Well, his neighbor didn't care for him being over there, and he was kind of mad about this and that. So he just goes over and shoots him for getting these grasshoppers. You see, you've taken my grasshoppers. They came over and got Alfred and tried to get him to a doctor, and he died on his way, and the other one was brought in and tried to convict him for his crimes. There was here on the Upper Elk River a man by the name of Cutler who had a whole bunch of kids. The paper said he had 13 of them at different ages and so on. Well, his wife, Minnie, had gone to work for a guy by the name of Grant. But Grant had cheated her out of her pay. So Cutler goes over to try to collect it. Words are said, and Cutler was killed. Well, because he's from Missouri and not of the same class and what have you, Grant got off very light in the whole thing. Now, getting on with, I don't know, do I have a time limit here on this? Anyhow, getting on with some of the crimes go on in Oak Creek. One of the biggest ones that we rarely consider the crimes was what went on in the mines themselves. You see, when you talk about miners and exploitation and what have you, but they were paid, the miner was paid in script. They paid at the companies. Well, what he would do is in order to have some cash, he would bring it into Oak Creek, and for $5 worth of script, he could get 2.5. Then the others would split it and back and forth. But when he was working, that is, the miner was paid by the ton, and he was in his room, the mine boss would come in, and then he'd reach down and look at his dinner bucket, and if there wasn't a payment in there, he went down to the water hole where he had to pump it out. He couldn't make any money doing it by clearing it out and getting his timbers and so on. The rope riders, that is the people who picked up the cars and what have you, and set the cars out for them because they got paid by the ton going out. Well, if he didn't get paid, you didn't get a car. Or he picked it up too soon. Or whatever. So you had to pay off the blacksmith and everybody else. The mines, you see, they paid you by the ton, but none of the mines in Oak Creek had a scale to weigh the ton of coal when it came out. So this is one of the things that leads to the strike of 1910, 1913, and 14. Now the reason I bring that up, talking about the crime and the things that you don't find, in the spring of 1914, one of the Phelps Baldwin detectives goes into Walker's store, and while he's in there, Reed is in there reading. He's not a miner and he's not a striker. He's got the house down across the street from where the post office is now, you see. Well, the Baldwin Phelps, there must have been some kind of earlier problem, as the newspaper said, shot Reed. Now, he didn't kill him, but he did shoot him. Well, the Baldwin Phelps man is arrested, but then released. Well, then, about 3 weeks later, there was a shooting out, and 2 men were killed out on just east and north end of town. Well, just before they die, one of the men who happened to be the witness, the key witness in the shooting of Reading, he's one of those that is killed. He identifies 2 men who did the killing. One by the name of Perkins, and the other one A.H. House. Now, Perkins disappears from any of the records of anything we find. And as I was talking to Dude Todd, he says, well, he got a backdoor pardon, which simply means that you put him in jail, you didn't file anything in the paperwork, you left the door open and he walked out, caught a train and left. Gone, the backdoor pardon. But A.H. House, though, he's there and he is set out on bail. Well, he goes down to the Moffat mine and goes to work. While he's working at the Moffat mine, somehow another string of cars got loose behind the man and killed him. The second time, the string of cars gets loose and nobody can explain how it happened. It just happened to happen. Now during this strike, William Dole, he had a place there in Oak Creek that was right there where the Colorado is now. It was Dole's, and across the street was Pierce's, and it was had the gambling, had the prostitution, and had out liquor and everything else. Now, Colorado went dry, 1914. Oak Creek did not go dry in 1914. As the newspaper said, there was more liquor sold and they had them by the barrels. I don't know how they got the numbers. Then in 1916, than there had been when it was wet. But there was a tremendous amount of it going on. Well, Dole, William Dole, he is related to the secretary of the United Mine Workers at part of the strike and what have you of 1913-14. And I want to get rid of him. In 1917, the county had 123 true bills at the court. Most of those were all aimed at somebody in Oak Creek associated with William Dole and Ann Dole's business. The guys living with somebody, with another gal, who's not her wife, being out on the street and a beggar, and anything and everything they could get to have them. Well, Frank Watts, who was, as we said earlier, was one of the big shots in town, his son Clint, when they were at Cripple Creek, had another guy had taken a businessman, tied him up on over a thing and threatened to drop him down inside of a shaft, a mine shaft, on the way down, and unless he paid him. Well, Clint went to prison, and Frank got him out, and he's in Oak Creek, and he had a drinking problem, as many people did there. Well, Clint, he comes into Dole's place, and he goes upstairs in the night, and he starts singing in front of one of the doors. And he, to one of the gals that's supposed to be in there. He must have been a terrible singer. Anyhow, Ann gets up, comes out and tells him to quiet, or else William Bill will come out and deal with him. He said, I'm not afraid of him. And so Bill gets up and comes out and threw him down the flight of steps. Then he went down the flight of steps to the landing and threw him down the next flight of steps and then threw him outdoors. Must have been a hell of a man to get that done, but he throws him out. Well, Clint then, a few days later, is drinking, and his buddies are egging him on. You're afraid of him, aren't you? You can't, yeah, he just get to you, don't he? Yeah. So Clint gets his rifle. Dole is going to catch the train and come to Craig to talk to a lawyer. And he comes into the depot and sees Clint comes in with his rifle. He says, makes some comment about him being a gunman. And Clint then points a gun at him. Well, Dole jerks his coat up. He fired and hit him. Dole goes home and lays in bed, damn near dies, and finally gets over it. He couldn't make all of his other court cases for a while. But then they tried Clint, and they said, no, it was self-defense. When he jerked his arms up, you see, he raised his coat, and if he left his hands down, it wouldn't have been, see, as he moved his arms, that was self-defense, and so Clinton got away, and Dole, they broke him. Very quick, the place was set up for a sheriff's sale. You had the talk down here, you know, about Brooklyn. Well, the man who was one of those operators at Brooklyn was a man by the name of Andy Black. Andy Black will replace Dole in Oak Creek, and from about 1918 till into the 1940s, Black ran the red light district, the liquor, and everything else in Oak Creek. If Johnny wanted to have a bar here, he'd have to go talk to Black, and if Black wanted to have it, he said, no, you have it over there. Wherever you wanted to go, you see, you couldn't, he would tell you who would come in with the liquor, who would not. As dude Todd said, he, as a boy, saw Black shoot a man one time that was a bootlegger. Whether he did or not, I don't know, but dude got around the town and knew what was going on quite a little bit. Andy, I know, when you talk about, and they kept a diary, you see, what, 10 minutes? I get signs here that I don't even know what they are. All right. Anyhow, I'll get the hell to going then. All right. But anyhow, now I've lost my train of thought. Andy, you see, when Pierce and Pee-wee had her diary, she talks about she was going to have dances upstairs and what have you. But she couldn't have them unless Andy approved it. He ran, and when you talk about a mafia, we had a little sort of mafia that was there in Oak Creek that ran it, and they controlled it. Well, since we're kind of running short on time here, I'll jump ahead a little bit and cover a couple of others that I think I need to go to. 1941. In Phippsburg, Everett Burning, I have to stop and think about his name. Him and his wife, Rose, now, she was a pretty nice young lady, a beautiful young lady, and he was a pretty good looking guy, I guess, from what they say. Anyhow, Burning came home from his shift, noon to eat, or midnight to eat, and he and his wife got in some kind of a fight, and he killed it. Or at least we thought that's what happened after a time. Well, Bruni did just put pretty crass old boy with a lot of nerve when it come right down to it. He left his wife, who he killed, hid back in part of the house, picked up his kids in Oak Creek because they weren't home then, took them out to Salt Lake. They spent 2 or 3 days in Salt Lake. Then they came back to, he came back to Phippsburg, and they were never able to find the body. Now what they thought, and what a lot of people swore to, and will swear to this day, is he was a hostler down at the roundhouse, and he brought the body down and stuck it in the firebox of a locomotive and cremated it. But that's not really what happened with it all, as time and events would tell us. But anyhow, Dude Todd. Now Dude Todd, we'll not talk to him, but he was a man of his own and was around and about, and ran for the city manager in Oak Creek for a while. But he ran for sheriff on the platform that he would get Bruni, get him arrested and have him tried. But he was elected. Well, the first thing that came up with Dude, besides being city manager, is he had to sell his business. His business was the slot machines and the punch boards in Oak Creek and in Routt County. He didn't think it'd be right for the sheriff to be running illegal slot machines and punch boards, so he sold them. Anybody want to take a guess of where he sold them to? He sold it to the town of Oak Creek. The town of Oak Creek bought the slot machines and the punch boards, and they used the money to build Sheriff's Reservoir. Oak Creek's water system is one of those unique pieces of work. See, in 1912, when they first put in a water system, they needed a reservoir to hold some water. And if you start up Oak Creek going up out of town, you'll see a small reservoir that's down below. Well, at that time, the railroad to the mine came around and circled the stream there, and they built a reservoir. And right next to it was a barn. Well, Oak Creek didn't own the reservoir, and they didn't own the barn either. But there was a homesteader that wanted a barn, so he gave the town of Oak Creek a quick claim deed to the reservoir. The town of Oak Creek gave him a quick claim deed to the barn. They took it to court in Glenwood, and the town got their water system, and he got the barn, and the mine got the right to pay for both of them. So they got the water system in, and then now they're gambling and paying for the reservoir. But anyhow, after Bruni left, Phippsburg, he went down to Grand Junction and went to work as a hostler there on the railroad, and they thought he was about to get drafted, so they claimed he deliberately got hurt, but anyhow he got a foot cut off. Then he goes up to Rawlins, Wyoming, and he married again. And then went to California. Well, now when Todd is sheriff, he's got a thing out trying to find Bruni. Well, he finds him up at Rawlins because he came back to his wife, and they pick him up for bigotry. His first wife, you see, is not known to be dead. So he can't say she's dead. So it's a flimsy charge, but they can hold him. So then Todd heads up to Rawlins to pick up Bruni and take him back down, and that's what they're going to do. But while he's gone, there's another crime that is committed while he's out. And I'll get back to it, and it's a pretty brutal one. But anyway, when he gets up to Rawlins, him and the sheriff are that is Sheriff Rawlins. They're standing at the bar drinking. You see, that's when the sheriffs could stand around in public and drink. Well, they see these two guys cheating on slot machines. Now, dude don't care for a person that cheats on a slot machine for obvious business reasons. So he gets the sheriff from at Rawlins, Carbon County, and they start after him. Well, the two men go outside and take off. Well, they get him and stop at the car. Well, they opened up the car door while they were in there, and Todd notices a unique rifle in the back seat, a .32-40. And there's not many of those around. Well, then Todd takes Bernie and heads down to Colorado Springs, and according to Todd, and I don't know it for sure, he said the first time in the state of Colorado they had a lie detector test was at that time. And they get Bernie to admit to the killing, and that he'd taken and thrown the body in the river down at Fruta, and let it float down the river. She was never found with it, and a year ago I did get a call from a granddaughter who wanted to know some more about the story. And anyhow, he will eventually in the court cases, because they take him across state line, was able to get out of it, get freed from it. But while Todd is going to Rawlins, there's two men, O.J. and Randall Thornberry, are coming through the country. Now these are some tough case people coming out of Texas. They are mean from one end to the other if you want to. Anyhow, they're coming from Craig, heading towards Hayden, and they picked up a hitchhiker. Thought they'd rob him, but decided he wasn't worth robbing, so they come into Hayden and stop at the highway bar. They buy the Thornberries their lunch and tell them where they can go get a job, you see, out towards Traverse Lake. Well, they head out that way on a stolen car and get lost, but on their way, they found a sheep camp in there of Purdy's. Purdy's gone out with his sheep when they come through the first time, and they just steal what they want out of the sheep wagon, their food and anything else, but they left the guns. They didn't take the guns, you see, for whatever reason. Well, then they come back in the evening and they decide to camp. Well, they're not very far from Purdy's sheep camp. Well, Randall gets to thinking about that old gun that was down there, the .32-40. So they decide to go get it, and they break into the sheep camp. Well, while they're in there, now Purdy's an older man and he's crippled up. They decide, Randall tells his brother, O.J. that when he was in prison in Arkansas, they'd showed him a knot, how to tie somebody up and he couldn't get loose. So they tied Purdy up, the sheep herder, and left him. And they head out. Well, 3 or 4 days later, the owner of the sheep comes by and they find Purdy dead. He could not get loose. It was a terrible thing to have happen by any standard. Well, because of this gun, once Todd gets back to Steamboat, he realizes that's the same two men that he saw up at Rawlins. So he gets the sheriff up at Rawlins to pick him up. Well, the sheriff said, "You'll have to hurry," because they'd already picked him up and some people from Texas was already up trying to come up to get him. I mean, first come, first served. So they run up and they get him at Rawlins. Bring him back down and they're holding him in jail. Well, now you got to understand, 4th of July can be important. Christmas can be important, and those holidays, but they're not as important as hunting season. When it was hunting season in this country at one time, they let the school out and everything else, everything shut down. And they went hunting. Well, the undersheriff, he's gone, and the rest of them are gone. And the only one that's there is Todd, the sheriff. Well, I think it is around one of the Thornberrys wanted some writing paper, and Todd got careless and came inside. Now he doesn't have his gun on him, but he came inside, and the other one snuck up behind him and hit him. He goes down. Now Todd was a pretty good sized man. Fought for a little bit. Then they lay down. He said, "I had to fake it to keep. They'd have killed me." Then they get outside and they take off. Well, they take the sheriff's car. Now you see, at this time, the sheriff had to furnish his own car, but the county was nice enough to supply him with a siren. So he had a siren on the car. They take off with that. The sheriff, he's down in jail. When he comes to, he gets to rattling the jail to try to get some attention. Well, a woman that's working up in the county clerk's office, she wonders why in the heck the sheriff doesn't shut him up, but she goes home. The judge is up on the 3rd floor, and there's only 2 people in the courthouse. He hears all the racket down there, and he goes home. See, nobody bothered to check and find out. Well, that night, they bring the food in to give to the prisoners, and they hear they're back there with all that racket, and they can't find the sheriff. Now, where in the world is the sheriff? And they hunt for him, and then they finally get the mayor of the town, and they go in, and there's the sheriff locked in his own jail, you see, and he can't get out, and his car's gone with a siren on it. Well, the Thornberrys, they go through Kansas and into Tennessee and every place else, and they would just use that siren. They'd pull somebody over and rob them. You know, they had a racket going. Well, O.J. Thornberry, he was married, and his wife had just had a baby, so they come back to Texas, to Waco. And the FBI is after him now because they got a lot of crimes besides just Oak Creek. They're in Routt County. And so they find O.J. and let's see, instead of, yeah, I'm just about to quit. I'm on it. They found O.J. He comes out and they start after him. Well, now he's got guns and they've got guns, but this isn't a shooting match. They have a car race across Texas till they finally run him down and put him in and capture him and bring him back here. And they bring back and get one of them here. I have one more. Now eventually they caught Randall and he goes to prison. Since I'm getting this time thing, I've got only one more quick one I need to cover. It's more of them. During the Depression, a man by the name of Eagleston, he was out on the Williams Fork, and the people he was working for came into town, so he just took a team and the camp gear and some guns and went out and pitched camp. Not too hard to find where he was at. When the people came home, they found their stuff had been robbed. They get the sheriff, and the sheriff comes out and they find Eagleston and pick him up and bring him into jail. But when they tried him, Judge Hewitt asked him, "Why did you steal it? What was the reason for it?" He said, "Well, I was working 12 to 16 hours a day for board. It wasn't all that good. The place I was living wasn't that good, and everything else was bad, and I just figured I could do better in prison." So he went to prison for 2 years. And I guess since I'm getting all kinds of signals to quit, I better stop. Any other questions?